All right, well, we are on to week 9. That's crazy. What is 9 in Spanish, Alex?
That would be...
I'm sorry, I put you on the spot. I'll let you think about it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9.
Nueve, week nueve.
Wait.
Is that right?
I got ocho. Nueve. Yeah. I just got back.
Yeah.
Like hours ago.
Yeah.
Feels like.
From where?
Dominican Republic.
Right on,
yes,
man.
With our partners, Nate and Rachel Stone at Love Restored in Harabacoa.
That's so great.
Yeah.
And so that being said, too, week 9, week nueve, in the Ephesians series we've got going on this summer. And this is Alex Cook. He is our group life and missions pastor. Yeah. Freaking awesome. And so in light of that, like you said, he just got back from the Dominican Republic. And my name is Miles Quote. I'm the creative and production director at our church here as well. And so that's awesome. And so, I mean, in general, I know that this is mostly a touch point about our series in Ephesians, but what's some things just that you've experienced over the last week when you were in the Dominican Republic?
Yeah, I give a quick little update. It was a whirlwind. What Nate and Rachel and Love Restored and their team is doing, it's amazing. It's one part, we were doing some building and getting the foundation ready for the new church community center building that they're doing there, which is incredible. We were doing some of the work on the safe houses, but then we went into the Haitian refugee camps, and we're kind of with ministering and helping out people there, and just growing relationships. We went to the public school there, which is kind of unique. Yeah, hung out with them, with the students there and the teachers, just trying to, bring light and the gospel to the public school, which is unique. We went to the shore, which is where like the sex trafficking and prostitution, hub is in Dominican Republic, and we were there just praying with people and girls, and it was, like I said, a whirlwind, but man, the gospel, it is a bright light in a dark place. So it was awesome.
That's fantastic. And, and now you've kind of like in a whiplashy kind of scenario. You were here this past Sunday morning talking again with another one of our ministry partners, but all the same too. And I think that this is one of the cool things about Ephesians and especially week 9's chapter 4 that we're in the middle of. You talked a lot about this idea of reaching essentially the hurting people of the Dominican Republic, and they all are hurting in different ways. And experiencing a new life abundantly with Jesus is essentially the only thing that gets them to a place of seeing their position and the grace that God offers them. And so, not to like hard pivot in here, but with Ephesians and things like that at large, as a group life and missions pastor, why do you think the book of Ephesians in general is valuable for your area of ministry, I suppose? Yeah, I mean, Ephesians is just, it's such an important kind of groundbreaking letter when you go through it all, because it's just kind of like, here's some instruction, here's some deep truth, all kind of mixed together in this beautiful letter to the church in Ephesus. But I think mixed with just the growing knowledge, you know what I mean? Because there's this need for the deep understanding of the things of God, the gospel. Like you got to know what the gospel is. You got to be taught and instructed in the way. But then like you see in Ephesians a lot of times, there's that practical aspect. Absolutely. So like, whether it's, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, Thailand, or North Canton Chapel, or North Canton, people are always asking, okay, well, now what do I do with the truth? Exactly. What do I do with this? How do I become, as we see the new man or the new self? Totally. And kind of step away from the old self and the old ways, but also be true in living out the gospel. So that's what I think the book of Ephesians does so well. Absolutely. And so that being said too, not to, we don't want to dip our toe too far into the text without getting into the text. So let's just go ahead and read it. How about I read verses 17 through 19, and if you want to take 21 through 24, does that work? Perfect. Awesome. Cool. So it says this, Ephesians chapter 4, 17 through 24 in full, says, "Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles do in the futility of their minds. They are darkened in their understanding, alienated from the form or from the life of God because of the ignorance that is in them, due to the hardness of their heart. They have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality, greedy to every practice, every kind or greedy to practice every kind of impurity. Love that. But that is not the way you learned Christ.
Yeah. Assuming that you have heard about him and were taught in him, as the truth is in Jesus, to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God, in true righteousness and holiness.
Awesome. Yeah. And so, like, It is good in some ways that this level of like intensity about the old, the new, the next step, essentially the how do we get to a life lived abundantly inside of the holiness of what God would have for us. And you're coming from a completely different side of living in terms of the last week you've spent in the Dominican Republic with Nate and Rachel, and now you're here. But this still reigns true in both scenarios.
Yeah, absolutely.
So whether it be, in one area of the world, or whether it be where our feet are planted presently, just putting on the new self, as the scriptures are saying, just putting on the new self mean no association with those in a former way of life. I think about, how maybe in a Western context, it's easy to just like cut people off and scoot them to the side and pretend like they don't exist for the sake of your own personal, quote unquote, like holy living.
Yeah.
Right. But especially in the Dominican Republic, where, I've been to the same areas that you've been, and you've gone even farther, but we both have seen how families live like nuclearly, like they live in the same house together. There's no options to really just jump out and go live a life independent of your family. And in some ways too, like I'd imagine, if you're a contributing member of that family, to leave them for the sake of Christ and say it's for the sake of Christ, but then leave them without provision and care is almost like it's a double-edged sword. I don't think you accomplish exactly what you want. So, I mean, from all the places and spaces in which you minister, how would you answer that question? Does putting on the new self mean no association with the former ways of life?
It's interesting because it's almost, when I first read this question, I almost read it in two different ways. Like, does putting on the new self mean no association with those in a former way of life? So I'm on one aspect, I'm thinking of like people, that were in my former life, the old self. But then I'm also thinking of things I did in my former life, just practices. And I think that's a huge question that we get asked all the time is, well, can I still do this, X, Y, Z? Can I still hang out with these people? I think if we know Paul in any way, there's a lot of freedom, in following Christ, and there's a lot of wisdom also.
Yeah,
so it's hard to just put like a black and white, yes, no, this is how you do it. This is how you need to step exactly in this way, because there's different contexts to different ways in different places of the world. Just like Dominican Republic, it's a little bit different than here, and Thailand, I'm sure, and places like that. So, no, I mean, there's a lot of people in my own life. Like, for instance, I grew up and I became a Christian in my early 20s.
Sure.
So I had a former way of life, and I had a lot of other friends and people that were in that former way of life. And I remember when I first became a Christian, it really felt like in that season I needed to just kind of like step away. Yeah. You know what I mean? And kind of distance myself and that. But now it's kind of unique because I'm finding myself, even earlier than this, but re-engaging as well with those people, because we see like, the gospel, like we need to be in the world, but not of the world. You know? So it's like coming back and like, absolutely you can be, but is that causing you to shift your focus away from Christ? Right. And that's like that's the hard one that really only you can, in your relationship with Jesus, can really truly know. And that's the difficult part of how to answer that question.
Yeah. No, and I think that, you're exactly right. So like if I'm tracking with you, if we're to like look at the arc of, Alex's like spiritual formation, like at the moment of salvation, you were like, oh my gosh, if I believe in it, I got to turn to it, And there's nothing wrong with that thought.
Yeah.
Like, you immediately want to cross-analyze, like, does it work with this? Does it work with that?
Yep.
Does, even in some ways, does the people that look in on my change and my conversion process, are they going to see Christ if I continue X, Y, and Z? And I think that's the heart of what we're really talking about. Yeah. But in some ways, like, once you get over that hump of traumatic, like, oh my gosh, I know a better way, and you just go, you begin to realize, wait a minute, let's talk this through. Yeah. Maybe there were some people in the dust of my movement that I maybe there's a ministry opportunity too, because you don't lose those relationships when you have that conversion process. If anything, it means that the people that you had relationship with before now see the testimony of where you were to where you are. Yep. So like, it's this weird thing. I was telling somebody the other day that in a weird like pairing of words is like, in my brain, I'd like to view it as like evangelistic Marxism. It's just I don't necessarily, barring sin, as long as it's not anti-biblical, we should do anything we can to get to the people that need to hear God's word. And sometimes it means that things that maybe were somewhat adjacent to our past life and people that we maybe had known and had influence with and friends with and things like that, it might mean that for the sake of the gospel, we still get to enjoy some of those influences or interests, but keeping it at the forefront of my mind that my life is explicitly meant to bring Jesus to the front of the conversation. And I think, to your point, the only person that's going to know your intentions when you pursue stuff is you. So ultimately, that's where your head-heart relationship with Jesus himself is going to be, primary, front and center.
For instance, exactly. Like, I remember when I first became a Christian, I almost had that Paul thing where I was just like, I went off and I was on my own. It felt like, and I was just like, this weird way is like, can I trust anybody? Like, I don't even know. I'm trying to find a Christian. Like, I just wanted to know Jesus and get in his word, but like just learning all that stuff. But then, I was on, this is just an example. I was on a softball team, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And in my early 20s, softball team. And we played softball and it was really, really fun. It was awesome. And it was mostly like all unbelievers, at that time on this team. And one thing they did was after the games, they would go to the bars. And I mean, that was just totally a cultural, normal thing. So to answer this question even further, it's like, so I was like, okay, I got to quit the softball team. Can't be around these people. Got to go like do this other thing, go to a church league now, blah, blah, blah. But then I was thinking, no, how about I stay on that team. I be a gospel influence. I bring the light of Christ where I am, and I try to stir gospel conversations and love these people. And they hopefully see like, oh, Alex is a little different. But then I choose to maybe not go to the bar. You know what I mean? So it's like, I can still engage with these people. I can still engage and be a light, but I still don't, like you're saying, I don't cross the line because I still want to honor God with my life.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's like this weird yes and no at the same time. But, I think if we truly are fixing our eyes on Jesus and trying to go into the hard, difficult places, and being a light there, that doesn't always look pretty and doesn't always look shiny and like this perfect Christian church thing. It looks kind of ugly sometimes, but we don't engage in sin. We just meet people where they're at and we show them the light. Yeah,
absolutely. And even, not that I think anybody's necessarily going to think you're saying this, because I know what you're saying. So like the transition of like, I am a light on this softball team, and it just happens to be that where the locker room talk and all the additional pieces that maybe don't venture into that opportunity for ministry happen to be when we go to the bar. So in light of that, though, I think that there's like a whole different angle too, where I have a handful of friends that live in the New England states. They had a church plant that they went out there and did that in 2019, maybe back half of 2018. And the cool part is that a lot of their Bible studies and a lot of their like great engagement with community was having a Bible study at a bar. And so like the funny thing is that like, even to Alex's point, he's not condemning the act of physically being in the bar. It's one of those, and if anything, I feel like this ties hilariously into our second question we got, which is, how have you been convicted by the Holy Spirit to avoid or abstain from things that draw you back to your former self? How can freedom in Christ look in your personal walk with Jesus?
That's actually that's funny, because that's exactly what I'm saying. Is to further my point. It wasn't that I was like, can't go to the bar.
Oh, totally. I didn't think that.
If I walk into Panini's and I'm wrecked, no, it was more like, for me personally, I knew that was a temptation, and it was something that I knew man, if I go in there, there's the potential for me to step into some things that I know God has rescued me from. So that was my because there's people I know who could have been like, oh, I don't struggle with this at all. This isn't temptation. Like, I'm all in, you know. And that for me in that time, now could I do that? And you know, as the Lord has grown me in different ways, like I'm, like you say, that freedom. Right. It looks a little bit different now as you grow in your faith than it does maybe early on in your faith too.
Absolutely. And I think that, so you said something that's actually kind of interesting, because the first time you said it, it was like, what are the optics on this?
Yeah.
You know, how will this, softball team see me transitioning to here? Maybe, because you yoked it with the, ministering to them.
Yeah.
But then as we kind of dug into that second question, it was like, well, wait, it's actually two tones. It's not just what they see from me. It's also me protecting myself, knowing what state of like spiritual development I'm in. And so I think this only harkens back to that extremely important point that you made before, which is just like only you and your relationship with Jesus will you be able to know fully the depth and breadth of where does that land with you. And I think that what some people can look at as like a freedom, it's not regarded in the Bible as sin explicitly, but it is one of those things that when you do this or when you're a part of that, you lose sight of the fact that Jesus should be at the forefront of your mind, on the tip of your tongue, easy to insert into conversation without the drop of a hat. And I think sometimes when you find yourself in those places and you aren't like thinking it through, that's when it's up for debate and asking yourself, is it a good idea to be there? And so all the things we talked about, definitely from like our places and spaces and how we kind of run with that. How would you, like, coming from a place like Dominican Republic and even Guatemala? I know that speaking with Mark Schmidt, our ministry partner that's in Guatemala and Buena Vista, he talks a lot about alcoholism in that place. Do you want to talk a little bit about how maybe in those environments, Mark has maybe talked about the concern that he's had with those things going on in his community?
Yeah, absolutely. So in that community specifically, there's a lot of alcoholism because of either a lack of job or just, you know, you can easily fall into that mindset, especially if your parents or your father did the same thing. It's really easy to say, okay, that's life.
It's okay. Yeah.
So I think his perspective is a lot different, where it's like, well, we have a lot of these freedoms, biblically speaking. Like there are a lot of things, and not one of those things is sin. There's never freedom to sin, but there are freedoms. However, for the greater good of the community, like the community that you are a part of, the greater good of those people entering into a relationship with Christ, there are some times like where that freedom isn't really a freedom, because that's actually that could potentially be pulling somebody further, or saying, hey, here's an open door to have freedom in this one. Really, like, biblically speaking, no, like that's not, that would be sin. So he's very much, Mark and Gene are very much in tune with, okay, not just their own lives, how they live, but also, and not just optics. It's like, man, we got to care for those around us. Totally. And a lot of times I think we do maybe not fail in American culture, but in our own Christian walk, it's like there's sometimes we have this perspective, or we have this mindset of, okay, what can I engage in and have freedom in? And we think, is it sin for me? Can I engage in this? But we're not even thinking about
the effects on others.
Could this affect, my friend Johnny, for instance, or could them seeing me do this, even though I'm totally free in it, could that pull them further from Christ? And it's being aware of that, you know what I mean? Which is like 3 steps ahead of like what decision you're going to make. It's like, I think those are the important things that I sometimes believe we don't always give thought to here, because we're like, oh, freedom, all right, I can do this. And then we're like, well, what about the people we're trying to minister to and love on and care for and point to Jesus?
And so, and even with that too, it is exactly true. So Eli Schmidt, Mark's son, he's been here this summer doing an internship with us for a couple months. And so one of the things I vaguely got a chance to talk with him about is just, some of the things that go on in his community that, Eli grew up in and Mark obviously is in right now, is just, it's not a small thing to see, or not an uncommon thing to see, somebody that just got off of work just drinking on the corner, not with their family. Yeah. And when I was there with Mark for a very short period of time, Mark felt totally comfortable to walk right up to the guy and say, "Stop and go home. Go to your family." Yeah. And I think that one of the things that's important to know is that Mark, even in that moment, he's not condemning alcoholism. He's condemning alcohol. He's condemning specifically the fact of what sin are you committing while you're standing here, and it just happens to be through this scope of what you're doing. And to that end, to what you said about what I do, how people justify it because of the way they see me do certain things, the same way too. You'll never see Mark in front of them drinking a beer on the corner because of the fact that he would be pseudo condoning things that lead to distancing from family, disregard to spouse and children and things like that. And so, no, I mean, this whole book is riddled with this intensity of content and conversation. And I think that the church in Ephesus very much had their own independent issues that needed to be talked through the lens of this letter. But in the same way too, just as it says in 2 Timothy chapter 3, is just like, this is built for reproof, for correction, and instruction in righteousness. And because of that, this is a thing that we're able to talk about right now. And so, Alex, thank you so much, man, for just like spending some time. I know that coming out of Dominican Republic, this is definitely a big, draw of breath to just be able to talk through all this stuff. But it's important, and I know that for group life context, for missions context, it's super valuable and super awesome. So I appreciate you coming and hanging out.
And I just want to end kind of like, I know some of these topics can be a little uncomfortable or intense, and people can be like, well, I don't see it that way, or I don't see it. And that's why it's so good to have these conversations.
Sure,
because sometimes there's, even in my own walk, I'm like, well, I got to process this. Yeah. But I think, man, if we're just fixing our eyes, like I've said this whole time, if we just are focusing on Christ and really trying to live a life poured out for the gospel's sake and for the things Jesus is calling us to, a lot of these things just naturally, like, they kind of just happen. Like, I just naturally want to honor Christ with my life, which then secondarily looks like caring for those around me. You know what I mean? Like Paul said, I will die to any freedom. Yeah. So that my friend can see Jesus correctly, or that my focus is on Jesus. Like, I don't have to walk in some of these things. I would rather die to that than have my friend led astray, and vice versa. I can praise God in some of these freedoms and honor him. So it's like this weird conversation, but it's good. It's good to have these conversations. It's good to really dig in this beautiful letter of Ephesians.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sending point is make Jesus the main thing, right?
Make Jesus the main thing.
That's right. Well, Alex, thank you so much, man. And so we're going to be continuing on in week 10. We're rounding the bend, almost done with the Ephesians series. So hang with us. We got a few more weeks in the hopper. We'll see you then.
Sweet. See you, man.